Who there? It's Rob, your old school no BS YouTube guy. Hey, this video is going to be about how I built my 1937 Elgin Klunker. So before I started building this bike, I visited a lot of videos on how to do this. There's a handful out there, but there was also a lot of missing information. So I'm going to try to fill in the gaps. It's not going to be a pretty video. It's informational only. So if you're building a bike, this might be helpful to you. So hang on and we'll be right back. All right, here it is. 99.9% complete. I got one thing left to do on it. But when I bought this, I bought the frame only. And the frame, it was essentially just a frame. It had the head badge on it, which is a pretty cool, like green patina head badge on there, and it's an Elgin. So I just learned recently that in the late 30s and early 40s, these bikes were made for Sears and Roebuck Company, and apparently there was two companies that were building these. One was a Westfield company, and the other was Murray. You're probably familiar with Murray bikes. And so from the Westfields, when they were built, the Westfields have this squared off head tube and everything's kind of square, whereas the Murray Elgins are rounded. In here, I think they call it filleted, like what you would see in the old Schwinn bicycles. So something that I thought was really unique about this frame was that the bike has built-in grease fittings or Zerk fittings right here in the head tube. There's also two of them down in the bottom bracket right here and right there. So I thought that was kind of cool. So when I bought the frame, I got the frame for $150. The frame came to me already powder coated. So I haven't done any painting to this. I essentially started bolting on parts. So my first intention was to make this a no suspension, but with disc brake bicycle. And so the first thing I did was I bought some bladed forks from Amazon, which I thought were pretty slick. They were set up for disc brakes, and they were nice wide blades that look really cool. But when I bought them, I realized that they were set up to be compatible with either a 26-inch wheel all the way up to 29. So I was afraid that the geometry on the bike, the head was going to be too tall and it was essentially going to turn into a wheelie machine. So I sent them back, and after thinking about it, I decided I was going to use a suspension fork. So I was looking for the RockShox Judy fork, which I think has been around for a really long time, and I actually think that is also it's the air fork. And I didn't have any luck doing that, so I ended up buying these RockShox right here. These are coil RockShox. They have a lockout, which doesn't really lock out, but it's a spring fork. And so far, so good. This is in a 1 1/8" steer tube, and I'll get to that in a second. So the wheels are 26-inch wheels. I got 26-inch wheels with 2.3 tires in here. I got plenty of clearance on all this. If you go to the back of the bike, you'll see that there's plenty of clearance and all that as well. So initially, I was going to put disc brakes on the back of this, and the back of this triangle on this rear end would not accommodate a 135mm standard bicycle wheel set. And so some of the other guys that I had seen on YouTube, they did what they called cold forging, where you put a piece of all thread in through your bottom bracket, put a nut on either side, and the same on the opposing side, and crank them out and try to bend them till they hold approximately 135mm. Well, I got them out far enough to where I could actually get the rim on there, but the problem was the mountain bike rims are quick release axles on them. So with these dropouts, these are rear dropouts on this bike. You can see right here, they drop out facing in the back. And when I tried to crank down on the quick releases, I could never get enough pressure on there to feel comfortable that they were going to hold. And the whole idea was that I wanted a freewheel on the back, so I'd have disc brakes in the back and have disc brakes in the front and a freewheel in the rear. So I bought all the parts and it just wasn't working out. And I was banging my head around to try to figure out how I was gonna make that happen. Finally came to the conclusion that it's just too much of a pain in the ass. So I just went with a regular 26-inch coaster brake with an 18-inch rear cog on this. And it looks pretty cool. It bolts up easily. And so that's kind of what I'm doing now. You also notice on these rear dropouts, might be hard to see because the black paint in here, where there's a threaded piece in here that's for a chain tensioner bolt that goes in here and it pushes the axle back to straighten up your wheel and also give you tension on the train. Well, I've been having a very difficult time finding the correct size bolt. I went to my local bike shop. They gave me a bolt that seemed to work. I took that bolt to Home Depot, got it sized up. It was supposed to be I think it was a 6mm bolt. I'm sorry, 5mm with a 0.80 thread pattern on it. So I picked up the bolts and I brought them back and they were just too sloppy inside there. Then I also went to YouTube and, I'm sorry, not YouTube, I went to eBay and I found a seller that was selling vintage parts that had these set bolts that were supposed to fit pre-war, and he called them Elgin for Elgins, and I think Schwinn's, and they didn't fit either. So at this point, I'd like to have them because I think they'd be kind of cool, and it's kind of part of the old school bike deal. But I really don't need them because I'm able to bolt down this back axle pretty fine and not have to worry about it sliding around. The wheels I got on Amazon. I pretty much got everything on here on Amazon, so don't judge me. I got the tubes with threaded with a nut on here so your tires aren't going to slop around inside. So that's pretty much it for the back end, and we'll go over here to the bottom bracket. So this is a 32 tooth chain ring, and what I did is I converted the bottom bracket from an American bottom bracket, and we did a conversion kit to a European or a BMX style. So this conversion kit is a press fit, and it has 3 bolts that go through on all 3/3 of the bottom bracket, and you just bolt it in there. You press fit first and then bolt it to secure it in place. And then I bought the crank set. The 2-piece crank set, slid right into the bottom bracket and spaced it out and bolted that thing on. So with this bottom bracket that's on here, one thing that I had a problem with was my chain line. So the chain line was way out of whack, and so I had to do some, added some spacers onto my chain ring and through here. So it's actually, I think 5mm. Each spacer here is 2.5. And so I added 5mm of spacers on these, and I had to get longer chain ring bolts. I got these bolts from Jensen USA, and they are 16mm long. You might see on this other side that they might hang out a little bit. Not really too bad. They come out just a little bit, but they're okay. It works well. So that solved my problem with my chain line. So I got my chain line all dialed in. So the next thing is these old frames came with a 5/8 seat post or seat stay. Back then they called them posts. And back in the old days, this seat post went up and turned on a 90-degree angle like this, and the seat slid across the top, and they sat rather low on these bikes. So with today's modern seats, they all use 7/8 connectors to hold the seat on, the seat brackets. So I've got a 5/8 seat stay in here. I got my 5/8 post. Now, how do I get this thing to work? So I was banging my head around to figure out how I was gonna make this happen. So what I ended up doing is bought about 5/8 solid steel rod. They're kind of heavy, and that's what this rod is right here. And so in order to make this rod work with that seat that's up there, I bought some 7/8 inch metal sleeves. So the inside diameter is 5/8 and the outside diameter is 7/8. So what I did was I took my metal grinder and I cut slots in the top of, let's see if I can hold this and show it to you. I cut slots in both directions with a metal cutting wheel and took them down approximately, I don't know, a 1/2 inch deep. And I took a 1/2 inch or the 5/8 sleeve and put it over the top. I had to knock it on there pretty good, but I knocked it about halfway down. Once I got it halfway down, I filled the top of this with JB Weld. Let it dry for a couple days, so now I've got a solid seat post. I'll actually show you the seat post. It will work with any everyday standard bracket. I don't know if you can see it. You can kind of see there's my my sleeve right in there, and that's just a standard seat post bracket right there. And I've got this beautiful Brooks saddle. So the Brooks saddle is a B17. I got it to match these ODI Vans pattern grips. I think it looks pretty cool. The seat is a darker brown. It's not like the orangey ones that you see that are really common. Sad thing is that seat came beautifully boxed and wrapped. When I cracked it open on the top, I don't know if you can see it there, is there some scratching that was right across the top of it. It was kind of a bummer, but you know, I'm figuring that this bike is gonna probably get banged up a little bit. So now moving from the middle of the bike, we'll talk about the pedals. The pedals are SE pedals right here. I had some of these left over from another build that I had, so we got some bear traps on here. So you gotta watch your shins. Obviously that is a coaster brake. Now moving on to the front. So the rock shocks are a 100mm shock. I was looking all over the place. I saw a bunch of bikes on YouTube and I kept asking the question, you know, how big are the forks? And nobody had the answer. So they're 100mm forks. I would not go any bigger than 100mm. That would be max I would put on these. Otherwise, you know, your front end starts going up like this. Right now, I'm like that, and it rides really well. I'm used to riding a 27.5 large mountain bike, and when I jump on this thing and ride it, it feels kind of small. So, you know, I'll get used to it. And the use of this bike is really an urban mountain bike, going off curbs and going down to a little drinker pub down the street. So I'm not going to be taking this thing out in the dirt. I don't think I might, I don't know, but just fart around and do the concrete jungle kind of thing. So 1.125" steer tube, threadless. And so everybody asked, well, how did you get that to work? Well, did my research on YouTube, and there was some good information out there. So what I did, my method is that I found a guy that had a resizing cutter head. And so it is a big, it's a cutter that slips down into your head tube. It fits on the top and it'll hone this thing out to 1.125". You spin it around and you do it on the bottom, and then your cups for your headset will drop right in. You still got to press them in and press them in. So one thing you need to be careful about is that all bikes are manufactured differently. Since these are older bikes, I had some pretty thick metal in this headset, and since this is an all steel bike. And so I was able to find a guy that would hone this thing out for me. He was a neighbor of mine where I work. He's got a BMX shop where he sells high-end BMX race bikes, and he had the tool. I called around to some of the other people. They wouldn't touch it because they didn't want to take the liability of doing something to the headset. And if I was to, you know, have the headset fall off and crack my teeth, I'd come after him. Anyway, I wouldn't do that. But this guy took care of it. Dave took care of it for me. Then when he was digging around in there, he saw some really, really shoddy welding on the inside of the tube. And so I tried sliding my fork up into it, and it was hitting metal pieces up inside there. So I had to go in and do some surgery on that and remove some more metal. It was a little bit of a pain in the ass. So I ended up buying a bit, and I've got that bit right over here from Amazon, of course. I'm an Amazon freaking whore. So here's the bit that I used to grind out some metal. So there's brazing on the inside where they connected the top tube and the down tube to this headset. all around this side here and on the inside in here. And so I had to remove some of that until I can finally get the fork on there clear with no resistance, and so it can spin properly. So I put it all together, and so now we've got it spinning freely and everything works well. But I'm a little concerned, plain and simply, because I removed some metal in there, and this doesn't have the fillet like the Schwinn's do. And I'm looking at this, it's just cut into the hole and then it's brazed on the inside. So I'm a little nervous, since I removed some metal in there, that this thing might fall apart on me. So what's gonna happen next is I have fabricated a bracket that I'm gonna have that set in here like this. I'm gonna have that welded onto that bracket to help support, you know, this whole joint in through here, and maybe buzz a couple welds around this just to make this a little bit better. The headset steer tube cups are bomber. I think that's what they're called. Bomber cups. And then the rest of the stuff, again, is just, you know, cheap ass shit. The bars have like, I think it's like in a 2.5-inch rise, and I left them at full width, which I think is 750 millimeters, and then a single break over here. So the idea behind all this, or I think the spirit behind a Klunker build, is that you're supposed to slap things and slap it together with parts that you have. And I got way caught up into this, you know. I wanted to go buy some used parts, which I did, like the front wheel set is used. And I just ran into, you know, roadblocks where I couldn't find stuff. And I'm a really impatient guy. When I get going on something, man, I just keep rolling with it. So it ended up costing a whole hell of a lot more when I start piecing everything together. Some of the little tools that I had to buy to make this work. I think the only thing that I actually had laying around my garage were these pedals. Everything else I had to buy, literally everything. But it turned out beautiful. I'm really, really happy with it. I can't wait to ride it some more. If you have any questions, I think I pretty much covered it all. Those were my only stumbling points with this. You know, build one of these things. It was a lot of fun. Make it your own. There's no rules. You know, someone will look at it and say, hey, this is a pretty badass bike. But some people say, hey, that's not a clunker. It's kind of a clunker. And I enjoyed the hell out of building this thing out. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to leave some questions on the bottom. Other than that, man, I'm out, and thank you for watching.